You ever have one of those places you go to so often it almost feels like home? For me, that was Joe's Bar. Small, tucked away on the corner of 8th and Main, just outside the bustle of downtown. I liked it because it was quiet, familiar, the kind of place where you could sit in your usual spot, sip your beer, and forget the world outside. It was a Tuesday night, late October, and I remember the rain pattering against the windows. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale beer and fried food, the neon sign buzzing faintly above the entrance. I was nursing my second drink when I first noticed him. A guy sitting at the far end of the bar. Never seen him before, which was odd, considering Joe's didn't exactly get a lot of newcomers. He had this off-putting stillness about him. While everyone else chatted, laughed, or at least fidgeted with their drinks, he just sat there, staring into his whiskey like he was trying to see something in it. "You know him?" I asked Mike, the bartender, who was wiping down glasses. Mike barely glanced over. "Nope, came in an hour ago. Hasn't said a word." I shrugged it off, but something about the guy didn't sit right. He looked normal enough, mid-40s, dark hair, clean-shaven, but it was his eyes that got me, hollow, like they had seen something no one should. Every so often he'd look up and scan the room, like he was searching for someone or something. I went back to my drink, chatting with Kelly, the usual waitress, when I felt it, the weight of his stare. I glanced over and sure enough he was looking right at me. Not in a casual way, but like he knew me, like he was waiting for me to say something. "Hey man, you good?" I asked, forcing a chuckle to break the tension. He didn't answer, just tilted his head, almost like he was trying to recognize me. That was enough for me to call it a night. I threw some cash on the counter and told Mike I'd see him later. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a wall. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking towards my apartment a few blocks away. But after a couple minutes, I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing. Just empty streets and the glow of distant traffic lights. I picked up my pace, but the footsteps, they matched me. Not faster, not slower. Just there. "Okay, you're imagining things," I muttered to myself. Too much to drink. Then I saw it. A figure standing beneath a broken streetlight. The same guy from the bar. Just standing there, watching. "Hey!" I shouted, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "You need something?" No response. He just stood there, and then, without warning, he took a step forward, then another. I turned and walked faster, my heart pounding. I could hear his footsteps behind me, steady, unhurried. I ducked into an alley, hoping to lose him, but as I rounded the corner, there he was, standing at the other end like he'd been waiting for me. I backed away, my mind racing. "What do you want?" My voice cracked. Finally, he spoke. "You don't remember, do you?" His voice was calm, almost disappointed. I shook my head, my throat dry. "Remember what?" He took another step closer, and I could see it now, his face. Not the guy from the bar anymore, but someone familiar, too familiar. Me. The scar above his eyebrow, the way his jaw clenched when he was nervous. It was me staring back at me, older, different. I stumbled back, my mind scrambling for an explanation. A prank? A hallucination? But no. He was real, too real. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his expression unreadable. "You took a wrong turn somewhere." I blinked, shaking my head. What the hell does that mean? He sighed, almost sad. "You'll see, soon." And just like that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, me, and the way he looked at me, like he knew something I didn't. I stopped going to Joe's after that, stopped walking home the same way, but deep down I know it doesn't matter. Because wherever I go, I have this feeling. He's still out there, waiting, watching. And one day I'll figure out what he meant. I just hope it's not too late. You ever had a feeling, just a gut instinct, that something was off? Like you're watching everything happen around you, but something doesn't quite fit? That's how it felt that night at Harper's Pub. My name's Dan Riley, and I've been bartending in this small town for the last 6 years. It's not much, but I like it. Harper's is a quiet spot, the kind of place where the biggest excitement is usually a couple of regulars arguing over the baseball game on TV. It's predictable, familiar, safe, at least it used to be. That night started out like any other. It was a chilly Thursday evening in October, the kind that made you want to stay inside with a drink and some company. A few of the usuals were here: Mike, an old-timer who never strayed far from his whiskey; Jenna, who always sat at the far end of the bar scrolling through her phone; and Rob, a trucker who'd pass through town every few weeks and swear up and down that this bar made the best burgers in the state. I was wiping down the counter when the door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air. A guy walked in that I'd never seen before. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing a dark coat that looked like it had seen better days. He didn't look around, didn't hesitate, just walked straight to the far end of the bar and sat down in Jenna's usual spot. She didn't say anything, just scooted down a few seats, eyes glued to her screen. Now, I'm used to strangers coming through. We're right off the highway, so you get your fair share of travelers. But this guy, something about him felt off from the start. He didn't order right away, just sat there staring at the bottles behind the bar like he was trying to decide something important. I finally walked over and asked, "What'll it be?" He looked up at me, and I swear his eyes were empty. Not in a sad way, just hollow, like he wasn't really seeing me. "Water," he said. His voice was low, scratchy, like he hadn't spoken in a while. I poured him a glass, and he just sat there staring at it. Didn't drink, didn't touch it, just stared. At first, I figured maybe he was tired, long drive, bad day, whatever. But after a few minutes, I noticed something weird. He wasn't just sitting there quietly, he was listening. His head was slightly turned toward the regulars, and every time someone spoke, he'd tilt his head, like he was absorbing every word. I tried to ignore it, but after a while, even Mike, who never paid attention to anything but his drink, leaned over and muttered, "What's with the guy?" I shrugged it off, just passing through, I guess. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Then it got stranger. Around 10 p.m., a guy I didn't recognize walked in. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder like someone had followed him. He made a beeline for the bar, sat down 2 seats away from the stranger, and ordered a double whiskey. Neat. I could see his hands shaking when he reached for the glass. And that's when I noticed it. The stranger at the end of the bar? He was watching the new guy now, his eyes locked onto him like a predator sizing up prey. The nervous guy must have felt it too, because he shifted in his seat, muttered something under his breath, and downed his drink in one go. Then he leaned toward me and whispered, "Hey man, you got a back exit?" I frowned. Yeah, but it's for staff only. Everything all right?" He didn't answer right away, just glanced over at the stranger again and said, "If anyone comes looking for me, I was never here." Before I could ask anything else, he threw a 20 on the bar and practically sprinted out the front door. I looked back at the stranger. He was still staring at the door, his fingers tapping lightly against the counter, slow, deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. The whole place felt different now. Even Jenna put her phone down, watching the stranger with cautious glances. Rob had stopped mid-bite, burger halfway to his mouth, eyes darting back and forth like he was trying to figure out if he should leave. Then, just as suddenly as he'd come in, the stranger stood up. He didn't finish his water, didn't pay, just stood, adjusted his coat, and walked out without another word. We all sat in silence for a while after that. Finally, Mike broke it. "What the hell was that about? I didn't have an answer, I just knew something felt wrong." The next day, I checked the local news, and that's when I saw it. A guy matching the nervous man's description, flannel shirt, beard, the works, was found dead in his motel room just a few miles down the road. No signs of a struggle, no forced entry. The cops said it was natural causes, but I don't buy it. Not after that night. And the stranger? Never saw him again. But sometimes, when the bar's empty and it's just me cleaning up, I swear I can still feel someone sitting at the far end, listening, watching. I don't scare easy. I've worked at Clancy's bar for almost 7 years now, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that people are unpredictable. I've seen it all. Bar fights that start over a spilled drink, marriages that end at the counter, and regulars who sit in the same spot every night, thinking the bottom of their glass holds some kind of answer. But what happened last October, it still gets to me. It was a Friday night, late, past midnight, and things were winding down. The usual crowd had trickled out, and I was stuck with the stragglers, Matt, who'd been nursing the same beer for an hour, and Lindsay scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. The bar was quiet, just the hum of the old neon sign in the window and the occasional clink of a glass in the sink. Then he walked in. Tall guy, maybe mid-40s, wearing an old brown coat and a black beanie pulled low over his head. He didn't look like much, just another loner passing through. But there was something off. He didn't make eye contact, didn't hesitate, just walked straight to the bar and sat down at the far end where nobody ever sat. I walked over, wiping my hands on a rag, and said, "What can I get you?" His voice was low, almost too quiet. "Just a beer. Whatever's on tap." Simple enough. I poured him a pint and set it down. He didn't drink right away, just sat there, running a finger along the rim of the glass. I noticed he wasn't wearing gloves, even though it was freezing outside. His hands were pale, fingers thin, almost delicate. I went back to my side of the bar, trying not to stare, but I could feel him watching me. 5 minutes passed, then 10. He barely touched his drink. Matt finally leaned over and whispered, "What's his deal?" I shrugged. Beats me. But deep down I was unsettled. Something about the guy made the hair on my arm stand up, and I couldn't figure out why. He wasn't drunk, wasn't rowdy, but there was an energy about him. Like he didn't belong here, but he was exactly where he wanted to be. Then Lindsay got up, tossing some cash on the counter. "I'm heading out," she said, giving me a look I couldn't quite place. Not scared, exactly, but uneasy, like she didn't want to be here anymore. As soon as she left, the guy finally spoke again. "She made the right choice," he said, staring at the door. My stomach tightened. What? He turned his head slowly toward me, his eyes empty. Nothing. I laughed it off, but it came out forced. "Rough night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He smiled. "Just barely. Not really. Just passing through." But he wasn't. Something told me he wasn't just passing through. A few minutes later, Matt left too, giving me a nod like, "Good luck, buddy." And just like that, it was just me and the stranger. The silence stretched between us. I wiped down the bar, checked my phone, did anything to avoid looking his way. But every time I glanced up, he was staring at me. Not drinking, not moving, just watching. I finally broke. "You, need anything else?" He shook his head slowly. "No rush." And that's when I realized something. He wasn't waiting for a ride. He wasn't waiting for anyone. He was waiting for me. I tried to laugh it off, but I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. Well, closing soon. He glanced at the clock. "Yeah, I know." The way he said it, it was like he knew more than just what time we closed. I started cleaning up, wiping down the tables, stacking chairs, but I kept one eye on him the whole time. He finally took a sip of his beer, and for a second I relaxed. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But then he spoke again. "You been working here long?" I nodded. "Yeah, 7 years." He smiled again, that same eerie, almost amused smile. "I know." My hand froze mid-wipe. "What? I've seen you before." I stared at him, trying to place his face, but nothing about him seemed familiar. "I don't think so, man. I'd remember you." He tapped his fingers against the bar, rhythmic, slow. "I've been here before, a long time ago." Something about the way he said it, it made my skin crawl. I forced a laugh. "Yeah? We get a lot of people in and out." He didn't blink. "Not me." I swallowed hard and took a step back. "Look, I gotta start closing up." He didn't move, didn't argue, just sat there staring at his drink. Finally, I grabbed the key from under the counter. "Last call." That's when he looked up at me with those eyes, and I swear to God, they were too dark. "You sure?" I froze. I didn't answer him, I just flipped off the neon sign and moved toward the door, praying he'd take the hint. He didn't. He just sat there, watching me like he was waiting for something else. Finally, after what felt like forever, he stood up. He pulled out a few crumpled bills and set them on the counter. "See you around, Dan," and he walked out. I stood there, frozen. I never told him my name. I never said it once. I locked the door the second he was gone and bolted to the back room, pulling up the security footage. I had to see where he came from. I rewound the tape to when he walked in, but the screen, it was empty. I saw myself standing at the bar staring at someone, but on the footage, he wasn't there. Just me, talking to nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I slept much after that. I never saw him again. But sometimes when I'm walking home late, I feel it. That same feeling, like someone's watching. And every time I close up alone, I hear it. Those slow, rhythmic taps against the bar, like he never really left. I don't usually get rattled. I've been working in bars long enough to know people can be weird, sometimes harmless, sometimes not. But this was different. I don't talk about it much, but I think about it all the time. It happened about a year ago on a slow Wednesday night at Miller's Tap, the bar I've been working at for the past 3 years. Miller's is one of those places people forget exists. No neon lights, no fancy cocktails, just cheap beer, good wings, and regulars who like their routine. I like it because it's easy, no surprises, no drama. At least that's what I thought. That night it was dead, maybe 3 people inside, all of them glued to the game on TV. I remember checking my watch, counting down the minutes until I could lock up and get out of there. That's when he walked in. Now, I see new faces all the time, but something about this guy, it was like the air changed when he stepped inside. He wasn't intimidating, just wrong. He was tall, thin, wearing a plain gray hoodie with the hood up, even though it wasn't cold. He walked in slow, almost like he was taking it all in. When he reached the bar, he didn't sit, just stood there, staring at the menu above the bottles. "Hey man, what can I get you?" I asked, forcing a friendly smile. He looked at me and I swear, his eyes were blank. Not empty, just like he wasn't really looking at me, like he was looking through me. "Beer," he said, his voice low. I nodded, grabbing a bottle from the cooler. "But okay?" He didn't respond, just slid a 10 across the counter. I popped the cap, handed it over, and gave him his change. He didn't take it, just stood there, one hand wrapped around the bottle, the other resting on the counter, fingers tapping slowly. Tap, tap, tap. It was steady, too steady. I don't know why it got under my skin, but it did. "First time here?" I asked, trying to break the weird silence. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving mine. Then he said something that sent a chill down my spine. "I used to come here, a long time ago. I tried to play it cool, yeah? We've been open about 10 years now." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. No, before that. I frowned. Before? This place used to be a bookstore. His fingers drummed the counter again. Tap, tap, tap. Places change. I didn't know what to say to that. Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. I glanced over at the guys in the corner, but they were too into the game to notice anything. I went back to wiping down the bar, trying to ignore the knot forming in my chest. But the guy? He just stood there, not drinking, not moving, just watching. Then he said, "It looks different now." I froze mid-wipe. Different how? He smiled again, taking another sip. Brighter, cleaner. I didn't like where this was going. "Hey man, you sure you've been here before?" He just nodded, slow and deliberate. "A long time ago." I forced a chuckle. "You must be thinking of somewhere else." Like I said, this was a bookstore before. He didn't respond, just stared past me like he was looking at something that wasn't there. The tapping started again. Tap, tap, tap. I felt a chill creep up my spine. Something wasn't right. I glanced at the clock, 12:45. 15 more minutes and I could close up. I decided I wasn't gonna wait. I walked over to the door, flipped the sign to closed. Sorry, man, I gotta start shutting down. He didn't move, just stood there, fingers still tapping, staring at the shelves behind me. Finally, he said, "You ever wonder what happened to the guy before you?" My mouth went dry. "What?" The bartender, his voice was flat, emotionless. "Before you." I swallowed hard. No, can't say I do. He finally looked at me again, and for the first time I noticed something off about his face, like he was wearing an expression he didn't quite understand. "I remember him," he said. "Nice guy." I felt my pulse quicken. "Yeah?" He nodded. Didn't leave, though. My heart was pounding now. I glanced at the guys in the corner again, but they were still watching the game, oblivious. "All right, man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Time to call it a night." He took one last sip of his beer, set it down gently, and leaned in. His breath smelled stale, like he hadn't had anything but alcohol in years. "You're lucky," he whispered. I didn't respond. I just watched as he slowly turned and walked out the door without another word. The second he was gone, I locked it, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I went to clear his bottle. And that's when I saw it. His change. The $10 bill he gave me. It looked old. Too old. The edges were frayed, the ink slightly faded. I held it up to the light and felt a lump in my throat. The date, 1993. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day I asked my manager about the bartender before me. He gave me a strange look. "We've had a few," he said. "Why?" I shrugged it off, but later that night I looked it up. And that's when I found it. 1993. Miller's Tap had been a bar back then, too. There was an article about a bartender who went missing, left work one night and never made it home. No sign of him. No suspects. Nothing. The picture in the article? It looked a hell of a lot like the guy who walked in last night. I don't know what happened that night or why he came back, but every time I close up now I feel it, that same weight in the air, and when it's real quiet, I swear I still hear it.